I never thought I'd end up in a courtroom at 87 years old, being sued by my own son-in-law. But here I was, clutching a legal summons with trembling hands, my name, Stephen Harrington, printed in cold, unfeeling letters next to the word defendant. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. It all started 3 months ago during our usual Sunday family dinner. Scott, my daughter Emma's husband of 22 years, had been unusually attentive, refilling my water glass, asking about my health, even helping me to my chair. I should have known something was off. In all our years as family, Scott had never shown such consideration. He was always polite but distant, the kind of son-in-law who remembered your birthday only when reminded. "Dad, we need to talk about something," Emma said after dinner, her voice unnaturally high. She wouldn't meet my eyes, instead focusing on the tablecloth, where her fingers traced nervous patterns. Scott sat beside her, his arm draped possessively over her shoulder. "It's about the money, Stephen," he said, dropping all pretense of warmth. "The $300,000 from Margaret's estate." Margaret, my dear wife, gone 5 years now. The pain of her loss still felt fresh some days. "What about it?" I asked, genuinely confused. "We know you've been hiding it," Scott continued, his voice hardening. "Emma's mother wanted that money to go to her. It was supposed to be Emma's inheritance." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Margaret had left everything to me. Yes, but there was never any hidden money. We'd lived comfortably but modestly. After her medical bills, there wasn't much left. "That's not true," I said quietly. "There is no $300,000. Margaret's medical care took most of our savings." Emma finally looked up, her eyes so like her mother's, filled with doubt. "Dad, we found papers, investment accounts. Mum's name was on them." "What papers? What accounts?" My heart was pounding now. "Emma, there's been a misunderstanding." Scott pulled out a folder and spread several documents across the table. Bank statements, investment records, all with Margaret's name and figures circled in red marker. They looked official, but something wasn't right. "These are fake," I said after examining them. "I've never seen these accounts." "That's what elderly people often say when caught hiding assets," Scott said with a patronizing smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Memory issues, confusion, it's understandable at your age." The condescension in his voice made my blood boil, but I kept my composure. 47 years on the federal bench had taught me to control my emotions. "I'm not confused, Scott. These documents are fraudulent." That's when Emma started crying. "Dad, please, just give us what Mom wanted us to have. We don't want to take this further." "Take this further? What does that mean?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. Scott straightened in his chair. "We've consulted an attorney. If you don't transfer the funds willingly, we'll have to pursue legal action." "You're threatening to sue me? Your own father-in-law?" The words felt surreal coming out of my mouth. "It's not a threat. It's about what's right," Scott insisted. "That money belongs to Emma." I looked at my daughter, hoping to find some hesitation, some doubt about what they were doing. Instead, I saw resolution hardening her features. "Emma, please. You know me. You know I would never steal from you or your mother." "Then explain these," she said, pushing the papers toward me. "Explain why you've been living so frugally if you have all this money." I always lived modestly, even during my years as a federal judge. That was something I'd never shared with Scott's side of the family. After a particularly dangerous case involving organized crime 30 years ago, I'd kept my professional life separate from my personal one. New acquaintances knew me only as Stephen Harrington, retired government employee. Even Emma had grown up knowing I worked for the government, but not the full extent of my role. "There's nothing to explain because there is no money," I repeated. "These documents are fake." Scott scoffed. "We'll let a court decide that." As the weeks passed, the situation only deteriorated. Scott convinced my 2 grandchildren that I was hoarding their inheritance. My son James, who lived out of state, called to ask if I was having cognitive issues. The family I'd loved and protected for decades was slipping away, united against me. The worst came when Emma stopped visiting altogether. She wouldn't take my calls. When I went to their house, Scott told me she didn't want to see me until I came clean. My own daughter thought I was lying to her. The isolation was crushing. At 87, after losing my wife, my family was all I had left. Now they were gone too, all because of Scott's lies. The legal summons arrived on a Tuesday morning. The complaint alleged financial exploitation, fraud and concealment of assets. Scott was suing me for $300,000 plus punitive damages. The court date was set for 3 weeks later in the downtown district court. Ironically, the very courthouse where I'd presided for nearly 5 decades. As the day of the hearing approached, I didn't hire an attorney. I knew that courthouse better than any lawyer I could retain. Instead, I spent my days gathering what evidence I could to prove the documents were falsified, but without access to Scott's computer or records, it was nearly impossible to prove a negative, that the money didn't exist. The morning of the hearing, I put on my best suit, a dark navy one I'd reserved for special occasions. Margaret had bought it for me for our 50th anniversary. As I adjusted my tie in the mirror, I hardly recognized the man staring back at me. His eyes were tired, his face drawn with grief, but there was also determination there. The same determination I'd carried with me through thousands of cases. When I arrived at the courthouse, Scott and Emma were already there, along with their attorney, a young man with slicked back hair and an expensive watch. My grandchildren, Alex and Lily, sat behind them, avoiding my gaze. The entire family had come to witness my humiliation. I took a seat at the defendant's table alone. The courtroom was familiar. I'd heard countless cases in this very room, though always from the elevated bench, never from the defendant's chair. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Ross," the bailiff announced. As everyone stood, I straightened my back despite the arthritis that had plagued me in recent years. Judge Ross entered, his robes flowing behind him, and then he saw me. Judge Michael Ross stopped dead in his tracks. The recognition in his eyes was immediate. 25 years ago, he had been a young attorney appearing in my courtroom. 10 years later, I had been on the committee that recommended his appointment to the bench. "Sir," he said, his voice carrying through the silent courtroom, "what are you doing here?" I could feel every eye in the room turn toward me. Emma looked confused. Scott's expression shifted from confidence to uncertainty. "Hello, Michael," I said quietly. "It appears I'm being sued by my son-in-law." Judge Ross looked down at the docket, then back at me, his brow furrowed in disbelief. "Your Honor," Scott's attorney began, "if we could proceed—" "Just a moment," Judge Ross interrupted. He turned to the bailiff. "Please clear the courtroom except for the parties directly involved." After the spectators were ushered out, Judge Ross addressed the room. "I believe some introductions are in order. For those who don't know, the defendant before you is not merely Stephen Harrington, retired government employee. He is Judge Stephen Harrington, former Chief Judge of the Federal District Court for the Eastern District, one of the most respected jurists in our state's history, and I might add the man who administered my oath of office." Scott's face drained of all color. He turned to Emma, whose hand had flown to her mouth in shock. "Now," Judge Ross continued, fixing Scott with a penetrating stare, "would you like to explain to me why you're suing a retired federal judge for fraud based on—" He glanced at the file. "These highly questionable documents." The silence that followed was deafening. In that moment, as understanding dawned on my family's faces, I knew that everything was about to change. The silence in Judge Ross's chambers felt heavier than the oak door he'd closed behind us. Scott sat rigidly in a leather chair, his attorney whispering urgently in his ear. Emma hadn't stopped staring at me since the revelation in the courtroom, her eyes wide with questions. Judge Ross had suggested we move our discussion to a more private setting, away from curious ears. "Judge Harrington," Ross began, the formality of his tone conveying deep respect, "I must say, this is not how I imagined we would next meet." A small, sad smile crossed my face. "Nor I, Michael. And please, it's just Stephen now." "Not to me, sir," Ross replied firmly. "Never to those of us who served with you." I could see Scott shifting uncomfortably, the gravity of his mistake beginning to sink in. He had chosen the worst possible venue for his fraudulent lawsuit, the very courthouse where my portrait hung in the judge's conference room. "For the benefit of everyone present," Ross continued, "perhaps you could explain why you never shared your distinguished career with your family." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of decades of silence. My eyes found Emma's, seeing the confusion and hurt there. "It began in 1978, I started. I was assigned a case involving the Lombardi crime family. After I sentenced several high-ranking members to life imprisonment, there were threats against my family. The marshals suggested compartmentalizing my life, keeping my judicial identity separate from my family life. I turned more fully toward Emma. "Your mother and I agreed it was best. You were only 5 years old. We decided that my position would remain confidential to all but our closest friends. When you grew up and married, we simply maintained that practice. Most people knew me only as a government employee, which wasn't untrue. For 47 years, Emma's voice cracked. The habit of privacy becomes ingrained, I said softly. After the immediate threat passed, it seemed prudent to maintain that separation. Judges make enemies, Emma. Every criminal I sentenced, every party who lost a case, they all knew my name, my face. Keeping that separate from our home life gave us peace. But I'm your daughter, Emma whispered, tears forming. You could have trusted me. It wasn't about trust, I assured her. Your mother and I decided together. And after she passed, I paused, feeling the familiar ache of Margaret's absence. After she was gone, there seemed no reason to bring it up. My career was over. I was just your dad. Scott cleared his throat. If I may, he began, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. I think we've had a serious misunderstanding here. A misunderstanding? Judge Ross's voice took on the edge I remembered from his days as a prosecutor. Mr. Lawrence, you filed fraudulent documents in my court against a former chief judge. I'd suggest you choose your next words very carefully. Scott's attorney placed a restraining hand on his client's arm. Your Honor, perhaps we could have a brief recess for me to confer with my client. Denied, Ross said flatly. I want to hear Mr. Lawrence explain these so-called investment accounts right now. I studied the documents spread across Ross's desk, the same ones Scott had presented at our family dinner. Looking at them with professional eyes rather than those of a shocked father-in-law, the inconsistencies were glaring. The routing numbers were incorrect. The letterhead was slightly misaligned. The signatures, supposedly Margaret's, were clearly forged. These aren't even convincing forgeries, I observed quietly. Scott's face flushed. His attorney looked increasingly uncomfortable. Where did these come from, Scott? I asked directly, my judicial demeanor returning naturally after all these years. Scott stammered, then fell silent. Your Honor, his attorney interjected, my client wishes to withdraw his complaint immediately. That's not an option at this stage, Ross replied coldly. These documents were submitted to the court as evidence. If they're fraudulent, that's a criminal matter. The blood drained from Scott's face. I thought he had money hidden away, he blurted. Emma's mother was from a wealthy family. It made no sense that there wasn't a substantial inheritance. So you fabricated evidence of it? Ross asked incredulously. I had expenses, debts that needed covering, Scott continued, desperation creeping into his voice. When Stephen, Judge Harrington, insisted there was no money, I thought he was lying, hiding it. So you created fake bank statements to bolster your claim, I stated, the pieces falling into place. It wasn't a question. Scott didn't respond, which was answer enough. Emma had gone completely still, her eyes moving between her husband and me. You lied to me, she finally said to Scott, her voice barely audible. You made me believe my father was stealing from us. Emma, you don't understand, Scott pleaded. We need that money. The business is underwater. The house. Stop talking, mister. Lawrence, his attorney advised sharply. But the damage was done. Emma stood abruptly, moving away from Scott to stand near the window, arms wrapped around herself. I think I'm beginning to understand why your previous marriages ended, Scott, I said quietly, recalling background information I'd gathered about my son-in-law years ago when Emma first introduced us. A habit from my judicial days. I always researched people who entered my family's life. Scott had been married twice before Emma, both ending in acrimonious divorces. Scott's head snapped up. What do you know about that? More than you might expect, I replied evenly. I made it my business to know who was marrying my daughter, even if I kept my own career private. Judge Ross cleared his throat. I think we need to address the immediate legal matters. Mr. Lawrence, I'm referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of possible charges, including perjury, filing false documents, and attempted fraud. You can't do that, Scott exclaimed. I not only can, I am obligated to, Ross replied sternly. You brought this case, you submitted these documents. As Ross spoke, memories flooded back. Thousands of days on the bench, maintaining order, ensuring justice was served. I'd sentenced corrupt politicians, embezzlers, and violent criminals. I'd mediated complex civil disputes involving millions of dollars. I'd mentored dozens of young attorneys, including Michael Ross himself. And now, in my twilight years, I found myself at the center of a case once again, but not as the impartial arbiter, as the wronged party. "Your Honor," I said, an idea forming, "if I might make a suggestion." Ross nodded respectfully. "Of course, Judge. I have no desire to see my son-in-law prosecuted," I said, surprising everyone in the room, including myself to some extent. "That would only cause more pain for my daughter and grandchildren." Scott looked up, hope flickering across his features. "However," I continued, "I want the record to be absolutely clear. There was never any hidden money from Margaret's estate. The documents presented were fabricated, and I want my family to understand who I really was, who I am." "Dad," Emma said, moving closer to me, "why didn't you ever tell me about being a judge all these years?" I reached for her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. "At first, it was for safety. Then, it became habit. And I suppose," I admitted, "there was a part of me that wanted to just be your father, not Judge Harrington." "When Mum was sick," Emma said slowly, pieces visibly connecting in her mind, "you covered all those medical expenses yourself? There really wasn't any hidden money?" "Every penny went to giving her the best care possible," I confirmed gently. "I would have spent 10 times that amount if it would have helped." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "And I believed Scott. I thought you were—" "I'm so sorry, Dad." Judge Ross watched our exchange with understanding in his eyes. He had known Margaret. He had attended her funeral, though he'd kept a respectful distance from the family section, honoring my private life. "If I may," Ross interjected softly, "I think there's a path forward here. Mr. Lawrence," he turned to Scott, "Judge Harrington is showing you more mercy than you deserve. If he's willing to forego pressing charges, I suggest you express appropriate gratitude." Scott looked between his attorney, his wife, and me. For once, the calculation in his eyes was replaced with genuine fear. I'm sorry, I made a terrible mistake." "A mistake?" Emma echoed incredulously. "You turned me against my father. You forged documents. You filed a lawsuit. That's not a mistake, Scott. That's a campaign." The office fell silent again. In that moment, I saw Emma not just as my daughter, but as a woman coming to terms with a painful truth about her marriage. The realization broke my heart all over again. "Perhaps," Judge Ross suggested, "Mrs. Lawrence would like some time alone with her father. There are matters I need to discuss with Mr. Lawrence and his counsel regarding the withdrawal of this case and potential consequences." Emma nodded gratefully. As Ross led Scott and his attorney to an adjoining conference room, Emma and I were left alone in the judge's chambers. "All those years," she said softly, "when you would disappear for work. You were here wearing robes, making important decisions." I nodded. "I'm sorry for the deception, Emma. It began for your protection, but I should have told you when you were old enough to understand." "Did James know?" she asked, referring to her older brother. "No," I assured her. "Neither of you knew. Only your mother." Emma wiped away tears. "All those times, Scott complained that you never helped us financially, that you were stingy with your government pension. You were a federal judge. You could have—" "I wanted you and James to make your own way," I explained. "Your mother and I agreed on that. We helped in ways you didn't always see, your college funds, the down payment on your first home that came through your aunt, but was actually from us." Emma looked stunned. "The inheritance from Aunt Judith, that was from you?" I nodded. "We wanted to help without making you dependent. Perhaps that was old-fashioned of us. But why keep your career a secret even after you retired?" I considered her question carefully. Pride, perhaps, or its opposite. I didn't want to be defined by my position. To you and the grandchildren, I was just Grandpa Stephen, not the Honorable Judge Harrington. There's a freedom in that simplicity. Emma's expression softened. "Dad, I would have been so proud to know. Alex and Lily would be too." "Then perhaps it's time they learned," I said, feeling a weight lifting that I hadn't even known I was carrying. "If you think they're ready." Before Emma could respond, the door opened and Judge Ross returned alone. "Mr. Lawrence and his attorney are preparing a formal withdrawal of all claims," Ross informed us. "I've made it clear that any further legal action would be ill-advised." "Thank you, Michael," I said sincerely. "No thanks necessary, sir," Ross replied. "Though I must say, your return to this courthouse has caused quite a stir. Several of the staff who worked with you have asked to say hello, if you're amenable. The idea of reconnecting with my past life, of bringing together the two halves of my existence that had remained separate for so long, was both terrifying and oddly liberating. I'd like that," I said, surprising myself. But first, I think my daughter and I have much more to discuss." Emma squeezed my hand, tears still shimmering in her eyes but a small smile beginning to form. "I think," she said quietly, "I need to hear everything about Judge Stephen Harrington, all the stories I've missed." "There are quite a few," I admitted. "We have time," Emma assured me, and for the first time in months I believed her. We did have time. Time to rebuild, to understand, to heal. The fraudulent lawsuit that Scott had intended as my downfall had instead become the catalyst for truth. As we prepared to leave Judge Ross's chambers, I caught a glimpse of myself in a decorative mirror on the wall. Not the broken old man I'd seen in my bathroom mirror that morning, but someone with purpose, with dignity intact, someone with a story finally ready to be told. The week following the courtroom revelation passed in a blur of uncomfortable family conversations. Emma had moved temporarily back into my house, taking the guest room that had remained unchanged since her college days. She couldn't bear to stay with Scott after discovering the extent of his deception. "The business is failing," she explained one evening as we sat on the porch, the sunset painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. "He's been hiding it from me for over a year. The lawsuit against you was his desperate attempt to find money." I sipped my tea, letting the information settle. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that we might lose the house," Emma admitted, her voice small. "He took out a second mortgage without telling me, maxed out our credit cards. He forged my signature on some of the documents. The revelation didn't surprise me as much as it should have. I'd seen Scott's type before in my courtroom and in life. Men who believed themselves cleverer than everyone else, who thought rules were for other people. "Why didn't you tell me you were struggling?" I asked gently. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Scott said you wouldn't help, that you were hoarding your money for yourself. And I believed him because—" She hesitated. "Because you didn't know I had been a federal judge," I finished for her. She nodded, wiping away tears. "I thought you were just being stubborn and selfish. I'm so ashamed, Dad." I placed my hand over hers. "You have nothing to be ashamed of. Scott manipulated you, just as he's manipulated others before you." "What do you mean?" I hadn't planned to reveal everything I knew about Scott so soon, but perhaps it was time for complete honesty. "After you introduced us to Scott, I did some research. Old habits from my judicial days," I explained. "He's been married twice before you. Both marriages ended when his financial schemes came to light." Emma's face paled. "He told me he was married once before, briefly, to his college sweetheart. I'm afraid that's not true. His first wife was the daughter of a wealthy businessman in Phoenix. His second was a widow who had received a substantial insurance payout. In both cases, he managed their finances. In both cases, the money mysteriously disappeared. Why didn't you tell me this before we got married?" Her voice held no accusation, just genuine confusion. I sighed heavily. "I tried, in my way. Do you remember when I suggested you two sign a prenuptial agreement? Scott said you didn't trust him," Emma recalled. "He was so hurt. He said it proved you never accepted him as family. It wasn't about trust. It was about protection," I explained. "But I couldn't tell you why without revealing my background in law, and by then the habit of secrecy was so ingrained." Emma shook her head in disbelief. "All these years, all these secrets, from both of you." We sat in silence for a while, watching night fall over the neighborhood where she had grown up. "What happens now?" she finally asked. "That depends," I said carefully. "What do you want to happen?" Emma stared out into the darkening yard. "I don't know if I can stay married to him after this. The lies, the fraud, using me against my own father." Her voice broke. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you," I promised. "Financially, emotionally, in every way." "Scott won't let go easily," Emma warned. "Especially now that he knows who you really are. He'll think there's money somewhere." I nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, I expect he'll try something else. People like Scott rarely give up after one failed attempt." "What should we do?" The question transported me back to my days on the bench, when attorneys would look to me for direction, for wisdom. It was both familiar and strange to feel that mantle of authority again. "We prepare," I said simply. The next morning I made several phone calls to old colleagues, prosecutors, investigators, and fellow judges who had remained friends even after my retirement. I didn't ask for favors, merely information. By afternoon, a more complete picture of Scott's activities had emerged. He had indeed run his business into the ground through a combination of poor decisions and mismanagement. But there was something more troubling beneath the surface. Cynthia Martinez, a former prosecutor who now specialized in financial crimes, visited me at home while Emma was out grocery shopping. "Stephen, I've found some concerning patterns in your son-in-law's financial history," she explained, spreading documents across my dining room table. "He's been moving money between accounts, taking out loans under the business name, but using the funds personally. Classic signs of fraud." "Do you think he's been embezzling from his own company?" I asked. Cynthia nodded grimly. "It looks that way, and there's more. He has an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Small deposits at first, growing larger over the past 6 months. He's preparing to run," I realized aloud. "That would be my assessment," she agreed. "The lawsuit against you was likely a last-ditch effort to secure funds before he disappears. When that failed, he might try to take whatever he can and leave," I finished. "Including possibly pressuring your daughter to liquidate any assets in her name," Cynthia warned. "Has she mentioned him pushing her to sell anything recently? Property, investments, family heirlooms?" I thought back to conversations with Emma over the past few days. "He's been asking about her grandmother's jewelry collection, pieces I gave to Margaret that she left to Emma. Get those secured immediately," Cynthia advised. "And any documents Emma has access to, financial records, property deeds, anything that might help build a case." I thanked Cynthia for her help, promising to keep her updated. After she left, I sat alone at the dining table, surrounded by evidence of my son-in-law's crimes. The weight of what needed to be done next settled heavily on my shoulders. When Emma returned home, I helped her bring in the groceries, trying to find the right words. "Dad, what's wrong?" she asked, noticing my distraction. "We need to talk about Scott," I said carefully. "I've learned some things today that you need to know." Her face fell, but she nodded resolutely. "Let me put these away first." As we sat down together at the kitchen table, I explained what Cynthia had discovered: the offshore accounts, the misappropriated business funds, the pattern suggesting Scott was preparing to disappear. Emma listened silently, her expression shifting from shock to anger to a strange, calm resolve. "You're sure about this?" she asked when I finished. "The evidence is compelling," I confirmed, "and it would explain his increasingly desperate behavior. What should we do? First, secure your grandmother's jewelry and any other valuables he might try to take. Then, I think you should call your brother." Emma looked surprised. "James, why?" "Because he should hear the truth about my past from me, not through rumors. And because you shouldn't have to face this alone. Family stands together." For the first time in days, Emma smiled. A small, tired smile, but genuine nonetheless. "Like you always taught us. Like I always taught you," I agreed. That evening, Emma called James, who lived 3 states away with his wife and children. The conversation was long, emotional, and necessary. By the end, James had booked a flight to visit us the following weekend. After the call, Emma sat beside me on the couch, leaning her head against my shoulder like she used to do as a child. "I keep thinking about what Scott said in Judge Ross's chambers," she murmured, "that he needed money because the business is underwater. But that's not true, is it? The business is underwater because he stole from it." "It appears that way," I agreed. "All these years," Emma continued, "he portrayed himself as this brilliant businessman. He made me feel stupid whenever I questioned any financial decisions. And all along, he was the one driving everything into the ground," I finished softly. "I feel such a fool." I put my arm around her shoulders. "You're not a fool, Emma. You're a victim of a skilled manipulator. There's no shame in that." "Yes, but there is in what happens next," she said, sitting up straight, a new determination in her eyes. "I want him held accountable, Dad, for everything." I studied my daughter's face, seeing in it echoes of Margaret's strength. "Are you sure? It won't be easy." "I'm sure," Emma said firmly. "I spent 22 years married to a man who lied to me, stole from me, and tried to turn me against my own father. I want justice." The word justice resonated deeply with me. How many times had I cited the pursuit of justice in my rulings? How many lives had been altered in its name? "Then justice is what we'll seek," I promised, feeling a renewed sense of purpose that I hadn't experienced since leaving the bench. "But we'll need to be careful. Scott is cornered now, and that makes him dangerous." Emma nodded, understanding the gravity of what lay ahead. "What's our next step?" "Evidence," I said, the strategy already forming in my mind. "We need to document everything. Bank records, correspondence, the forged documents from the lawsuit. We build our case methodically, irrefutably." Like you used to do as a judge? No, I corrected her gently. Like I did as a law student long before I became a judge. We go back to basics. We follow the facts wherever they lead. Emma straightened her shoulders, ready for the battle ahead. Then let's begin. What neither of us realized was how quickly Scott would make his next move or how desperate that move would be. The silent preparation was about to become a very public confrontation, one that would test the bonds of our newly reunited family in ways we couldn't imagine. The confrontation came sooner than expected. I was in the kitchen making breakfast when I heard Emma's sharp intake of breath from the living room. She had been checking her emails on her laptop, a morning ritual she'd maintained even during this tumultuous time. "Dad," she called, her voice tight with alarm, "you need to see this." I wiped my hands on a dish towel and joined her. On the screen was an email from Scott to Emma, copied to their children, their friends, and several business associates. The subject line read, "The truth about Stephen Harrington." "He's trying to spin the story," Emma explained, her face flushed with anger. "He's claiming you used your position as a judge to hide assets, that you abused your power to intimidate him when he discovered the truth." I read the email carefully. Scott's desperation was evident in every accusatory word. He painted himself as a whistleblower, a concerned son-in-law who only wanted justice for his wife. According to his narrative, I had used my judicial connections to orchestrate a cover-up when he confronted me. "He sent this to everyone we know," Emma said, scrolling through the extensive recipient list. "Our neighbors, our church community, Alex and Lily's college advisors." "It's a preemptive strike," I observed, my judicial calm returning in the face of crisis. "He's trying to control the narrative before we can act." Emma's phone began ringing. She glanced at the screen and grimaced. "It's Lily. Our granddaughter was away at college, 300 miles from home. She had been distant since the lawsuit began, believing, like the rest of the family, that I had somehow stolen her inheritance." Emma answered the call on speakerphone. "Lily, I can explain." "Is it true?" Lily interrupted, her voice trembling with emotion. "Was Grandpa really a federal judge?" "Yes," Emma confirmed. "We only just found out ourselves." "And did he hide money from Grandma's estate like Dad says?" "No, sweetheart," I interjected gently. "That part isn't true. Your father created false documents to support that claim." There was a long pause on the line. "Dad said you'd say that. He said you're using your connections to cover everything up." Emma and I exchanged worried glances. Scott had clearly been working to maintain his influence over our grandchildren. "Lily," I said carefully, "I understand this is confusing. There's a lot happening that's hard to make sense of, but I promise you, I've never stolen anything from this family. I've only ever tried to protect you all." "Then why did you hide being a judge?" she challenged. "Why would you keep that secret unless you had other secrets?" It was a fair question, one that deserved a thoughtful answer. "I began hiding my profession for security reasons," I explained. "Later it became a way to keep my work separate from my family life. I wanted to be just your grandfather, not Judge Harrington. Perhaps that was selfish of me, or misguided. But it was never meant to deceive you." Another long silence followed. Finally, Lily spoke again, her voice smaller. "Alex says we should hear both sides before deciding anything. He's driving home this weekend." "That's a wise approach," I agreed, feeling a surge of pride in my grandson's maturity. "We'll answer any questions you both have honestly." After the call ended, Emma buried her face in her hands. "This is a nightmare. Scott is poisoning everyone against us." "Not everyone," I reassured her. "Lily and Alex are keeping open minds, others will too." "But Scott's email is full of accusations without evidence," I pointed out. "People who know us, who truly know our character, won't be so easily swayed." The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. Emma went to answer it while I remained at the laptop, reading through Scott's email again, noting each false claim, each distortion of the truth. "Dad," Emma called, her voice strained. "It's Detective Harrison from the police department." A cold weight settled in my stomach as I rose to greet our visitor. Detective Harrison was a middle-aged man with keen eyes and a carefully neutral expression. I recognized the professional mask. I had worn a similar one during difficult cases. "Mr. Harrington," he began formally, "I'm here to ask some questions regarding allegations made by your son-in-law, Scott Lawrence." "Please come in," I invited, gesturing to the living room. "I assume this is about the email he's been circulating." Detective Harrison looked mildly surprised. "You're aware of it?" "We just received it ourselves," Emma explained, offering him a seat. "There's also been a formal complaint filed with the police department," the detective informed us. "Mr. Lawrence is alleging judicial misconduct, fraud, and intimidation." Despite the seriousness of the situation, I almost smiled. Scott was overplaying his hand, making wild accusations that would ultimately undermine his credibility. "Detective," I said calmly, "I was a federal judge for 47 years. During that time, my record was impeccable. I retired with the highest commendations from my colleagues and the Bar Association. These allegations are not only false, but demonstrably so." "I understand, sir," Harrison replied, his tone respectful but professional. "However, I'm required to investigate all formal complaints." "Of course," I acknowledged, "and I'll cooperate fully. In fact, I believe we can save you considerable time." I explained the events of the past weeks: Scott's fraudulent lawsuit, the forged documents, Judge Ross's intervention, and our subsequent discovery of Scott's financial misdeeds. Detective Harrison listened attentively, taking notes. When I finished, he said, "This is a complex situation, Mr. Harrington. Would you be willing to provide documentation supporting your account?" "Absolutely," I agreed. "We've been gathering evidence of Scott's activities. Emma, would you bring the files we organized yesterday?" As Emma retrieved our carefully prepared documentation, I added, "You might also want to contact Judge Michael Ross at the Downtown District Court. He witnessed Scott's admission that the documents were falsified." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Scott Lawrence admitted to creating fraudulent documents in front of a sitting judge?" "Yes," Emma confirmed, returning with a thick folder. "I was there. He admitted everything when he realized who my father really was." The detective spent the next hour reviewing our evidence, occasionally asking clarifying questions. His professional demeanor never wavered, but I could see his initial skepticism giving way to understanding. "This is quite thorough," he finally commented, closing the folder. "Particularly these bank records showing transfers to the Cayman Islands account. My former profession taught me the value of detailed documentation," I said simply. Harrison stood to leave, tucking our folder under his arm. "I'll need to keep these for now, if that's acceptable. There are serious implications here that extend beyond your family dispute. Mr. Lawrence's business practices may warrant their own investigation." "We understand," Emma assured him. "We want the truth to come out, whatever that entails." After the detective left, Emma collapsed onto the sofa, emotionally drained. Will this ever end? Now the police are involved. This was inevitable, I told her gently. Scott's schemes were bound to unravel eventually. The important thing is that we're facing it together, with the truth on our side. Emma's phone chimed with a text message. She checked it and let out a surprised laugh. "It's from Alex. He says, and I quote, 'Dad just called me ranting about Grandpa being part of some judicial conspiracy. Is Grandpa secretly James Bond or something?' I smiled, genuinely amused by my grandson's resilience. 'What are you going to tell him?' 'The truth,' Emma said firmly, 'that his grandfather is a man of integrity who served his country through upholding the law, not a super spy.' The rest of the day brought a flurry of calls and messages from friends and family who had received Scott's email. Some were confused, others concerned, a few immediately supportive. Emma patiently explained the situation to each one, growing more confident with each retelling. By evening, a new email arrived, this one from Judge Ross to the same recipients of Scott's original message. It was brief, professional, and devastating to Scott's claims. "As the presiding judge in the case referenced by Scott Lawrence," Ross wrote, "I feel compelled to correct several mischaracterizations. Judge Stephen Harrington served this community with distinction for nearly 5 decades. The allegations made against him are without merit, and the documentation presented by Mr. Lawrence has been found to contain numerous irregularities that are currently under investigation. I would caution against accepting Mr. Lawrence's narrative without substantial verification." "Michael didn't have to do that," I murmured, touched by my former colleague's support. "No, but I'm glad he did," Emma replied. "The truth deserves a defender." Later that night, as I prepared for bed, I found myself reflecting on how quickly life could change. A month ago, I had been a lonely widower, estranged from my family due to Scott's manipulations. Now my past was exposed, my family was rallying around me, and Scott's carefully constructed facade was crumbling. There was a gentle knock at my bedroom door. Emma entered, looking more at peace than I'd seen her since this ordeal began. "I just got off the phone with James," she said. "His flight arrives tomorrow afternoon. He says to tell you he's proud to be Judge Harrington's son." A lump formed in my throat. "I've missed him." "He's missed you too," Emma assured me. "We all have, even when we were angry and confused." She sat on the edge of my bed, just as she used to do when she was a little girl waiting for a bedtime story. "Dad, I've been thinking about Scott's email about how he tried to turn everyone against us." "And?" I prompted. "And it didn't work," she said with quiet wonder. "The people who matter saw through it. Lily and Alex are coming home. James is flying in. Even our friends are reaching out to offer support. The truth has a way of emerging," I observed. "Yes, but it's more than that," Emma insisted. "It's you, the respect you've earned, the life you've lived." Scott thought he could destroy that with one vindictive email, but he was wrong. I reached out to squeeze her hand, overwhelmed with gratitude for this remarkable daughter of mine. "There will be more challenges ahead," I warned her. "Scott won't give up easily." "I know," she acknowledged, "but neither will we. The Lawrence family might be fractured right now, but the Harringtons stand united." As Emma left to prepare for her own rest, I turned off the bedside lamp and lay in the darkness, her words echoing in my mind. The Harringtons stand united. After all the secrecy, all the separation between my professional and personal lives, my family now knew me fully, both as their father and grandfather and as Judge Harrington. Whatever Scott's next move might be, we would face it together. And for the first time in years, I found myself looking forward to tomorrow with anticipation rather than resignation. What I couldn't have known then was that Scott's desperation would drive him to one final, reckless act, one that would bring our family drama into the public eye in ways none of us could have anticipated. The morning my son James arrived from Chicago brought both comfort and new complications. He embraced me in the airport with tears in his eyes, a rare display of emotion from my typically reserved firstborn. "I still can't believe my father is Judge Stephen Harrington," he said, shaking his head in wonder. "The same Judge Harrington my law professors used to quote in class." I hadn't known this detail, that my rulings had been part of James's legal education. It was strangely moving to discover this unexpected connection to my son's professional life. "You never mentioned that your professors discussed my cases," I remarked as we drove home. James laughed softly. "How could I? I didn't know Judge Harrington was my father. I just thought it was a coincidence we shared a last name." The reunion with Emma at home was equally emotional. For the first time in years, both my children were under my roof again. Despite the circumstances, I felt a profound gratitude for this unexpected gift. Our family gathering was interrupted by a call from Detective Harrison. "Mr. Harrington," he began, his tone grave, "we've uncovered some concerning information regarding your son-in-law that you and your daughter should be aware of." I put the call on speakerphone so Emma and James could hear. "We've been investigating the financial records you provided," Harrison continued. "The irregularities extend far beyond what you initially discovered. Mr. Lawrence has been systematically embezzling from his company for at least 5 years. The total amount exceeds $1 million. Emma gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. $1 million? Where did it all go? "Primarily to gambling debts and a lifestyle he couldn't afford," Harrison explained. "But there's more. In the process of our investigation, we've discovered a pattern of similar behavior dating back 15 years across 3 states. His previous marriages," I surmised. "Yes," Harrison confirmed. "Both ended when his financial fraud was discovered. In one case, charges were filed but later dropped when Mr. Lawrence agreed to restitution. In the other, the matter was settled privately." "And he's been hiding this all this time," Emma whispered, her face pale with shock. "There's something else you should know," Harrison added, his voice taking on a gentler tone. "We've found evidence that Mr. Lawrence was planning to leave the country. He purchased a one-way ticket to Grand Cayman for next Tuesday." The revelation hung heavy in the air. Scott had been planning to abandon Emma, to disappear with whatever money he could gather. "Has he been arrested?" James asked, the lawyer in him emerging. "Not yet," Harrison replied. "We're building our case carefully. Given Mr. Lawrence's connection to a former federal judge, we want to ensure everything is handled by the book. No one can claim any impropriety or favoritism." "I appreciate that, Detective," I said sincerely. After the call ended, Emma sat in stunned silence, processing this new information. James put a supportive hand on her shoulder. "I thought I knew him," she finally said. 22 years of marriage, and I never really knew him at all." Manipulators like Scott are skilled at presenting the version of themselves that others want to see, I explained gently. But for 2 decades, Emma countered, anger beginning to replace her shock. How could I have been so blind for so long? You weren't blind, James interjected. You were trusting. There's a difference. Before Emma could respond, the doorbell rang. James went to answer it, returning moments later with a woman I didn't recognize. Middle-aged, professionally dressed, with a determined set to her jaw. Judge Harrington, she began, extending her hand. I'm Rebecca Winters. I was Scott Lawrence's first wife. Emma stood abruptly. What are you doing here? Detective Harrison contacted me, Rebecca explained. When I heard what Scott was doing to another family, to you, I had to come. I couldn't let history repeat itself without at least trying to help. We invited Rebecca to sit, all of us eager yet apprehensive to hear what she had to say. Scott and I were married for 6 years, she began. My father owned a successful construction company. Scott wormed his way into the business, gained my father's trust, and eventually started managing the company finances. She paused, old pain evident in her expression. By the time we discovered what he was doing, he had embezzled nearly $800,000. What happened? Emma asked quietly. My father was too ashamed to press charges. He was afraid of the publicity, worried it would destroy the business's reputation, so we handled it privately. Scott signed a divorce agreement promising to pay back the money, which of course he never did. And his second wife? I prompted. Rebecca's expression darkened. Diane Miller, a widow with 2 young children and a substantial insurance payout from her husband's death. Scott saw her as an easy target. They were married less than 3 years. Did he steal from her too? Emma's voice was barely audible. Yes, but Diane was stronger than my father. She went to the police. Scott was actually charged with fraud, but he struck a plea deal. Minimal restitution, community service, no jail time. Rebecca shook her head in disgust. And then he met you. Emma looked devastated. I never knew any of this. He told me he'd been married once before, briefly, with no children. He's very convincing, Rebecca acknowledged. He makes you feel special, chosen, like you're the only one who truly understands him. Emma nodded, recognition dawning in her eyes. That's exactly how he made me feel. The conversation continued as Rebecca shared more details about her time with Scott, the manipulation, the isolation from her family, the gradual control he exerted over every aspect of her life. With each revelation, Emma's expression shifted between shock, anger, and profound grief for the years lost to Scott's deception. Why are you telling us all this? James finally asked. You could have just given a statement to the police. Rebecca met his gaze steadily. Because 20 years ago I wished someone had warned me about Scott Lawrence. No one did. I won't make the same mistake. After Rebecca left, promising to testify if needed, Emma retreated to her room. I respected her need for privacy, understanding that she needed time to process everything she had learned. James and I sat in the living room, the weight of the day's revelations heavy between us. She'll be all right, James assured me, noting my concerned glances toward Emma's closed door. She's stronger than she knows. She's a Harrington, I said simply. James smiled at that. Yes, she is. That evening, as we prepared dinner together, a family tradition from happier times, Emma finally broke her silence. I've decided something, she announced, her voice steadier than I'd expected. I'm done being Scott's victim. I won't let him define the rest of my life. That's my girl, I said softly. I'm filing for divorce first thing Monday morning, she continued, and I'm going to cooperate fully with the investigation. No more secrets, no more shame. James and I exchanged proud glances. Emma had always had her mother's resilience, though she hadn't always recognized it in herself. What none of us anticipated was Scott's reaction when he learned that his past had finally caught up with him, or the lengths he would go to in a desperate attempt to salvage his rapidly crumbling facade. Scott's final desperate act came without warning. 3 days after Rebecca Winters' visit, while Emma was meeting with her divorce attorney, Scott made his move. I was reading in my study when the doorbell rang insistently. When I opened the door, I found Scott standing there with a local news reporter and a cameraman. Judge Harrington, the reporter began, thrusting a microphone toward my face. Scott Lawrence claims you used your judicial influence to sabotage his business and destroy his marriage. How do you respond to these allegations? For a moment I was too stunned to speak. Scott stood slightly behind the reporter, a triumphant smirk on his face. He clearly believed he'd found a way to pressure me publicly. Drawing on decades of courtroom composure, I took a deep breath. I'll be happy to address those claims. But first, may I ask how you obtained my address? Mr. Lawrence provided it, the reporter explained. He said you've been avoiding public accountability. I nodded thoughtfully, then turned my attention directly to Scott. Did you also inform this reporter about the ongoing police investigation into your embezzlement of company funds, or about the plane ticket to Grand Cayman purchased in your name for next Tuesday? The smirk vanished from Scott's face. What investigation? The reporter asked, her attention shifting to Scott. I suggest you contact Detective Harrison at the Financial Crimes Division, I continued calmly. He can provide you with details about Mr. Lawrence's history of financial fraud across 3 marriages. The reporter's eyes widened with interest. She turned toward Scott. Is this true? Are you under investigation? Scott's face had drained of color. He's lying. This is exactly the kind of judicial interference I'm talking about. I don't believe Judge Harrington is lying, came a voice from behind them. Rebecca Winters walked up my front path, followed by a woman I didn't recognize. I'm his first wife, and this is Diane Miller, his second. We've both experienced Scott's financial fraud firsthand. The reporter looked like she couldn't believe her luck, quickly redirecting the cameraman to capture this unexpected development. Ladies, I said politely, would you like to come inside? I believe we all have quite a story to share with this reporter. The real story. Scott's attempted ambush had backfired spectacularly. Over the next hour, Rebecca and Diane detailed their experiences while I provided context about the current investigation. The reporter, initially skeptical, became increasingly engaged as the evidence mounted against Scott. This isn't what I agreed to, Scott finally exploded, jumping to his feet. You're all conspiring against me. No one is conspiring against you, Scott, I said quietly. Your own actions have led us here. Before Scott could respond, the sound of car doors slamming outside drew our attention. Through the window, I saw Emma arriving with James and, to my surprise, my grandchildren, Alex and Lily. I believe the rest of the family has arrived, I told the reporter. Would you like to hear their perspective as well? Scott made a move toward the door, but the reporter blocked his path. Mr. Lawrence, I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond to these serious allegations. The reunion that followed was both painful and healing. As my family gathered in the living room, the full story emerged for everyone, including the reporter, to hear. Scott stood silently in the corner, watching his carefully constructed world collapse around him. When Emma finally spoke directly to Scott, her voice was steady, her eyes clear. I want you to know that I don't hate you. I pity you. You've spent your life taking from others, and now you have nothing of true value. You don't understand, Scott began, but Emma raised her hand to stop him. I understand perfectly now. For years, I doubted myself because of you. I even doubted my own father. That ends today. The reporter, recognizing the significance of the moment, motioned for her cameraman to stop filming. Some stories perhaps deserve to unfold without an audience. After Scott and the news crew departed, the latter with a much different story than they had anticipated, our family remained in the living room, the atmosphere lighter than it had been in months. I can't believe it's over, Emma said, leaning against James on the sofa. Not quite over, I reminded her gently. There will still be the divorce, the legal proceedings against Scott. But the worst part is behind us, Alex interjected. At 23, my grandson showed a wisdom beyond his years. We know the truth now, all of it. Lily, my 20-year-old granddaughter, sat beside me, taking my hand in hers. Why didn't you tell us you were a judge, Grandpa? We would have been so proud. The question touched my heart. I wanted to be just your grandfather, I explained. Not Judge Harrington. Perhaps that was selfish of me. Not selfish, Lily disagreed, just humble. But now that we know, you have to tell us about your most interesting cases. I laughed, feeling a weight lifting from my shoulders. There are quite a few. Where should I start? At the beginning, Emma suggested, her eyes shining with newfound appreciation. We want to know everything about you, Dad. No more secrets. No more secrets, I agreed. In the weeks that followed, our family rebuilt itself on a foundation of truth. Scott was arrested for embezzlement and fraud. His schemes finally exposed to full public scrutiny. Emma filed for divorce, a process made simpler by Scott's mounting legal troubles. The story did make the local news, though not in the way Scott had intended. Instead of a scandal about a corrupt judge, it became a cautionary tale about financial fraud and a human interest story about a respected jurist reconnecting with his family. 6 months later, on a warm spring evening, we gathered in my backyard for a family dinner. James and his family had moved back to town, taking a position at a local law firm. Emma, officially divorced, had returned to teaching, rediscovering the passion for education she had set aside during her marriage. As I looked around at my family, my children, my grandchildren, all together and at peace, I felt a contentment I hadn't experienced since Margaret was alive. "A toast," James announced, raising his glass. "To Dad, to Judge Harrington, who taught us all about justice, integrity, and the power of truth." "To Grandpa," Alex and Lily echoed. Emma caught my eye across the table, her smile reflecting the journey we had traveled together. "To family," she added softly, "the real wealth that can never be stolen." As I raised my glass to join their toast, I thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought us to this moment. Scott's greed, intended to destroy me, had instead rebuilt our family. His fraudulent lawsuit, meant to shame me, had restored my identity. What had begun as betrayal had transformed into reconciliation. "To second chances," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "and to the truth that sets us free." Later that evening, as the younger generation cleared the dishes and James entertained everyone with stories from his law practice, Emma joined me on the porch swing, the same one where we had sat months earlier, trying to make sense of Scott's deception. "Are you happy, Dad?" she asked, studying my face in the gentle twilight. I considered the question carefully. "Yes," I finally answered. "Not despite what happened, but because of it. I have my family back. I have my whole self back." Emma nodded in understanding. "I feel the same way. It's like I've finally awakened from a long, confusing dream." "Your mother would be proud of you," I told her, "of how you've handled everything." "She'd be proud of all of us," Emma replied. The Harrington family resilience. As night settled over the neighborhood, stars emerging in the darkening sky, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. From the courtroom revelation that had started it all to this peaceful evening, surrounded by family, the path had been difficult, but necessary. Scott had intended the lawsuit as my downfall, never knowing it would instead lead to my redemption, not just as a respected judge, but as a father and grandfather fully known and loved by his family. Some might call it justice. I simply called it peace. For the first time in many years, I was not Stephen Harrington the widower, or Judge Harrington the retired jurist, or even Dad the misunderstood parent. I was simply myself, all parts united, all secrets revealed, and that perhaps was the greatest verdict of all.